We live in a world that doesn't just invite distraction, it demands it. Every day our minds are bombarded with notifications, deadlines, opinions, and endless information. It's as if we are swimming in a river of noise, and our inner self, the part that truly wants to listen, struggles to keep its head above water. The first reason many of us cannot hear the Holy Spirit clearly is not because the guidance is missing, but because our minds are too crowded to notice it. Imagine trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a rock concert. That is the experience of trying to listen to the subtle call of the Spirit when our mental space is occupied by fear, resentment, or ambition. We often think that being busy is a sign of productivity or success, but what we fail to realize is that this busyness comes at a cost. It disconnects us from the quiet voice that knows what we truly need. The more we fill our hours with trivial tasks, endless scrolling, or mental chatter, the less room we create for reflection, intuition, and divine guidance. Many people believe they are too spiritual to miss these messages, but spirituality is not measured by rituals or prayers alone. It is measured by the capacity to pause, to listen, and to recognize truth when it arrives. And if our attention is constantly fragmented, we are in effect deaf. Consider the mind as a room. If this room is cluttered with old fears, worries about the future, regrets from the past, and endless to-do lists, the Spirit's message has nowhere to land. It is there, waiting for your attention, but it cannot penetrate the chaos. We must learn to sweep our mental room, to remove the unnecessary noise, and create space for the sacred voice to be heard. Many ignore this need for clarity because it seems passive, even unproductive. Sitting quietly, breathing, and observing one's thoughts might feel like doing nothing, but in reality it is the most productive act for aligning with guidance that transcends the ordinary. Another reason our minds are so cluttered is that we rarely allow ourselves to fully process our emotions. Anxiety, frustration, guilt, and anger swirl inside us, creating a storm that drowns subtle insight. A mind weighed down by unresolved feelings cannot receive clarity, it only reacts. When someone is constantly reacting to social pressures, to bad news, to self-criticism, there is no room for reflection, and reflection is the language in which spiritual guidance speaks. If we are to hear the Spirit, we must first calm the waters of our inner world, and that requires courage. Courage to face uncomfortable truths, courage to be still when our instincts push us to act, and courage to trust that clarity will come if we only allow the silence to exist. Distraction is not always external. Often it is self-imposed. We fill our minds with endless planning, compulsive thinking, and mental comparisons. We replay conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, or obsess over achievements we have not yet reached. These habits give the illusion of control, but in truth, they create distance between us and the clarity we seek. The Spirit does not compete with the noise we generate. It merely waits for the moment when we are quiet enough to notice. Recognizing this is the first step, to stop believing that constant thinking equals constant progress, and instead to understand that sometimes progress is silent and invisible. Meditation, reflection, and intentio. Null pauses are not luxuries, they are necessities. Even a few moments of conscious stillness can act like a reset button, clearing away mental clutter and allowing insight to rise. Many people underestimate the power of this practice because they equate action with efficacy. Yet spiritual clarity rarely arrives in a hurry. It is subtle, patient, and persistent, but it will not penetrate a mind that is fully occupied with chatter, judgment, or fear. Learning to listen means learning to wait, to surrender the urge for instant answers, and to trust that guidance comes more often in quiet revelation than in loud epiphany. It is also important to remember that clarity is not about perfect calm, it is about relative stillness. No one is expected to live in a vacuum of thought or emotion. The key is to distinguish between what is noise and what is meaningful. Ask yourself, which thoughts elevate me and which thoughts merely distract me? The ones that elevate, that prompt reflection, and Hat nudge toward integrity are the ones worth paying attention to. The rest, endless worries about approval, comparisons, and regrets, are clutter, and they must be set aside if the spirit is to be heard. The tragedy is that many spend their lives waiting for grand signs while ignoring the small whispers that are always present. The whispers are there, but they are drowned out by overthinking, overplanning, and overstimulation. If you cannot hear them, it is not because they are absent, it is because your mind is too full to receive them. The challenge is simple but profound. Create space, calm your mind, and clear your inner room. In doing so, you do not just hear guidance, you feel it, recognize it, and are able to respond in alignment with truth. The first step toward hearing clearly is admitting that your mind is cluttered and that this clutter is not harmless. It is an obstacle, not a feature of life. The moment you acknowledge it, you open the door to change. You begin to see that spiritual clarity is not a reward for effort or perfection, but a natural consequence of stillness and awareness. Even when the mind is quiet, even when the clutter of daily life has been swept away, many still struggle to hear the spirit. Why? Because another layer of obstruction exists, one that is far subtler, yet far more insidious: emotional blocks and unresolved trauma. These are the invisible walls we carry inside us, built over years of disappointment, pain, neglect, and fear. They are the scars we try to ignore, the stories we tell ourselves about what we deserve or don't deserve, and the hidden resentments we hold toward others or even toward life itself. Until we confront these inner barriers, the voice of guidance remains muted, like music trapped behind a thick soundproof door. Trauma and unresolved pain are like anchors dragging us into a fog. When we carry bitterness from a betrayal, grief from a loss, or shame from a past mistake, our perception narrows, our sensitivity dulls, and our judgment becomes clouded. The spirit communicates in clarity, in subtle nudges, and in honest insight. But when we are weighted down by emotional baggage, these whispers are muffled. They may arrive as fleeting feelings, quiet instincts, or gentle urges, yet we mistake them for anxiety, confusion, or random thought, because we have not yet freed ourselves from the heavy emotional residue we carry. We often underestimate how much our past experiences shape our present capacity to listen. Consider a person who has been repeatedly criticized or invalidated in childhood. Even if they are now adults, the echoes of that voice linger in the mind. You are not enough, you cannot trust yourself, or you must hide your feelings to survive. These internalized messages create a lens of doubt and fear through which every signal is filtered. The spirit may be trying to offer comfort, guidance, or correction, but we dismiss it because we have learned to mistrust even our own intuit. Until these patterns are recognized and healed, spiritual clarity is obstructed. Healing does not always require dramatic interventions or therapy, though sometimes it does. Healing begins with acknowledgement. It begins with the simple, courageous act of facing what we have avoided, the resentment toward the person who hurt us, the anger we carry at circumstances beyond our control, and the shame we mistakenly accept as truth. Many people avoid this process because it is uncomfortable. They believe that ignoring the pain will make it go away. But in reality, avoidance solidifies the walls. Unprocessed emotions are like stones stacked in a tower, each one making the barrier thicker, each one making the divine whispers harder to hear. Emotional blocks are not limited to extreme trauma. Everyday wounds, small betrayals, broken promises, or neglected needs accumulate over time. Each small disappointment that we refuse to process adds a layer of tension, a subtle distortion in our emotional field. We convince ourselves that these things are trivial, yet collectively they form a significant blockage. The spirit is often like a stream flowing beneath the surface of our lives, but if we have constructed even tiny dams of unaddressed pain, the flow is diverted, slowed, or completely stopped. Forgiveness, both of others and ourselves, is central to breaking down these barriers. Forgiveness is not a gift we give to someone else, it is a gift we give to our own perception. When we forgive, we release the weight that distorts our understanding and dulls our sensitivity. We are not excusing harm or pretending it never happened. We are simply freeing ourselves from the emotional entanglement that prevents us from perceiving truth clearly. Similarly, self-compassion allows us to confront our mistakes without self-judgment, creating space to recognize the guidance that has always been present, but hidden beneath layers of guilt or self-recrimination. Antidote or obstacle is avoidance. CE of discomfort. The spirit rarely offers comfort first. Often it invites growth, change, or introspection. When we are blocked by fear, fear of confronting emotions, fear of change, fear of being honest with ourselves, we misinterpret these nudges as threats. We push them aside, label them as coincidental, or rationalize them away. The clearer the guidance, the more it challenges our comfort zones, and the more likely we are to resist. Yet resistance only strengthens the walls. Listening requires courage, and courage is cultivated through repeated acts of facing, feeling, and integrating our emotional experiences. It is also important to understand that unresolved trauma does not disappear simply because time has passed. Emotional wounds can lie dormant for years, re-emerging when we least expect them, often disguised as irritability, indecision, or anxiety. Each re-emergence is an opportunity, a call to attention, and a chance to release the grip of the past. When we meet these moments with honesty rather than avoidance, clarity begins to penetrate. Gradually the walls crumble, and the voice that was always present becomes perceptible. Finally, the work of confronting emotional blocks is ongoing. It is not a single event, but a continuous practice of self-reflection, acceptance, and emotional hygiene. The more we commit to understanding our inner landscape, the more the spirit can communicate with us. As the layers of unprocessed pain dissolve, life begins to feel lighter, and guidance is no longer something we strain to hear. It becomes a natural companion, a subtle but constant presence, guiding our thoughts, decisions, and actions. The ability to hear clearly is always proportional to the willingness to heal. One of the most common reasons people cannot hear the spirit clearly is that they confuse their own desires with true guidance. We live in a culture that prizes ambition, personal achievement, and self-expression, and there is nothing wrong with wanting to rove, to succeed, or to feel fulfilled. The problem arises when these desires are mistaken for the voice of the spirit. When our inner compass is entangled with what we want, rather than what we truly need, clarity becomes impossible. The spirit speaks in wisdom, discernment, and sometimes in gentle correction, but our own wishes often shout louder, drowning out the subtle voice that seeks to guide us toward growth and truth. Desires are natural. They arise spontaneously like sparks of energy, but they are not always aligned with our higher purpose. We might long for a promotion, a relationship, or recognition, and we may interpret every coincidental event or fleeting intuition as confirmation that these desires are divinely sanctioned. In reality, the spirit is rarely concerned with what satisfies ego or appetite. It is concerned with what nurtures integrity, love, and moral alignment. Confusing desire with direction is like trying to navigate a ship by looking at the waves instead of the stars. Waves are loud, constant, and often misleading. The stars are steady and unchanging. To hear the spirit, we must learn to recognize the difference. The challenge is that our desires often feel urgent. They demand attention, stir emotion, and create a sense of necessity. We mistake intensity for importance, assuming that what we want most is what we are meant to pursue. Yet desire is often impulsive, reactive, and tied to fear or lack. The spirit, on the other hand, communicates with patience and clarity. It nudges, it whispers, and it invites reflection. Its guidance may feel counterintuitive at first. For example, it might urge restraint when our impulses scream action, or it may encourage a pause when our ambitions push us to rush. Recognizing this distinction requires self-awareness and a willingness to question our own motivations. Another factor that complicates this confusion is attachment. We are often attached to outcomes, identities, and ideals we believe will bring fulfillment. When we cling to these attachments, we filter every sign, every feeling, every intuition through the lens of what we want rather than what is real. The Spirit's guidance is neutral, clear, and often challenging, but attachment clouds perception. We may interpret a warning as resistance, a correction as inconvenience, or a gentle nudge as irrelevant. Until we loosen our grip on these attachments, the guidance is obscured and our path remains unclear. One of the most important exercises in distinguishing desire from direction is learning to pause and reflect. When a strong longing arises, instead of acting immediately, ask yourself, is this what I want, or is this what is truly best for my growth and alignment? Practice creating distance between impulse and action, between emotion and decision. This space allows insight to surface. It allows you to observe your own motivations objectively, rather than being swept away by them. In this pause, you may begin to notice subtle signals, the quiet sense of peace, the intuitive yes or no, the inner alignment that are indicators of true guidance. It is also essential to recognize that desires often speak in the language of pleasure, comfort, or ego validation, while the spirit speaks in the language of integrity, growth, and moral clarity. Desires may promise immediate satisfaction, social approval, or the avoidance of pain, but guidance often requires delayed gratification, moral courage, or sacrifice. This distinction is subtle but crucial. When we follow desires blindly, we risk mistaking temporary satisfaction for true direction. When we listen carefully, discern wisely, and act with awareness, we begin to separate what is fleeting from what is lasting. Fear is another element that confuses desire with direction. We may desire something not because it is truly aligned with our purpose, but because we fear its absence. Fear of failure, fear of loneliness, fear of scarcity. These fears shape our wants, making them feel like divine nudges. The spirit, however, does not operate through fear. Its guidance is not manipulative or urgent. It is patient, steady, and consistent. Recognizing the difference between fear-driven longing and spirit-driven insight is key to hearing clearly. A practical way to cultivate this discernment is through journaling or reflection. When you notice a strong desire, write it down, explore its origins, and observe your emotional state. Ask yourself, am I reacting out of lack, ego, or fear? Or am I responding to a sense of alignment and truth? Over time, this practice strengthens the ability to recognize genuine guidance. It allows you to differentiate between impulses that arise from the self and messages that arise from something higher, wiser, and more enduring. Ultimately, confusing desire with direction is a natural part of being human, but it is also one of the greatest obstacles to spiritual clarity. It requires humility to admit that what we want is not always what we need, and courage to follow guidance even when it contradicts personal preference. The process is transformative. As we learn to listen beyond our own desires, we cultivate patience, awareness, and alignment. We discover that clarity does not always arrive with drama or grand signs. Often it comes quietly, in moments of reflection, honesty, and stillness. The ability to hear clearly depends not on eliminating desire, but on learning to discern it. Even when the mind is clear and emotional wounds are beginning to heal, many still struggle to hear the spirit. The reason often lies in fear, the fear of change, the fear of responsibility, and the subtle, insidious ways these fears keep us trapped in patterns that feel safe, but ultimately limit us. The Spirit speaks not only to comfort us, but also to guide us toward growth. And growth requires movement, yet movement is uncomfortable, and comfort is seductive. So many choose what feels safe over what is right, preferring the familiar cage of habit to the uncertain expanse of transformation. Fear of change is one of the most powerful blocks to clarity. Even when the Spirit nudges us toward a better path, we hesitate. We weigh the risks, imagine worst-case scenarios, and focus on potential loss rather than potential gain. This hesitation is natural. Change is inherently risky, but it becomes a barrier when it turns into avoidance. The Spirit often speaks in gentle nudges, in small opportunities that require action, and when we allow fear to dominate, these nudges are misinterpreted as coincidence, doubt, or internal noise. The guidance is there, but we do not recognize it because it asks us to step beyond the familiar, and stepping beyond is uncomfortable. Responsibility is equally daunting. Listening to guidance is not just about receiving insight, it is about acting upon it. Many people hear the whispers but resist because they understand that action carries consequence. The Spirit does not offer direction without inviting accountability. If it says, you must forgive, you must confront, you must change, it is not delivering punishment, it is inviting participation in life's deeper truths. Yet responsibility can feel heavy. It requires courage, discernment, and integrity. Avoiding it may seem easier, but in doing so, we inadvertently block ourselves from clarity. We may feel the message, but fear keeps us from acknowledging it fully. Fear often masquerades as rationality. We tell ourselves, I am being cautious, or I need more time to decide, when in reality, it is fear that whispers these words. Our attachment to comfort makes us justify avoidance. We convince ourselves that waiting will solve everything, that circumstances must align perfectly, or that the right moment will arrive. The truth is that clarity often calls for imperfect action. Waiting for certainty is a way of staying safe, but safety is not growth. The Spirit calls us to act in alignment, not in comfort, and fear can prevent us from recognizing this subtle difference. Consider how fear distorts perception. When we are afraid, we see obstacles larger than they are and miss opportunities that are actually aligned with our growth. We may interpret guidance as too difficult, too inconvenient, or too risky, when in reality the obstacles exist only in our minds. The Spirit's call is rarely about making life easy. It is about making life meaningful. Yet the subtlety of this call is often drowned out by fear, which amplifies uncertainty and diminishes courage. Over time, this leads to a life where guidance is consistently ignored, not because it is absent, but because we are unwilling to face the transformation it requires. Fear operates through the illusion of comfort. We cling to routines, relationships, and environments that are familiar, even when they no longer serve us. The Spirit may guide us toward new perspectives, new habits, or even new connections, but fear convinces us that these are threats to stability rather than opportunities for growth. The irony is that stagnation itself is far more dangerous than change. Remaining in the familiar may feel safe, but it blinds us to wisdom that is always present, waiting for us to embrace it. Courage is the antidote to this fear, but courage is not absence of fear. It is action in spite of it. True clarity requires the willingness to step into uncertainty, to accept that responsibility is part of the journey, and to trust that guidance is aligned with a deeper intelligence than our limited understanding. Each small act of courage, speaking the truth, making a difficult decision, releasing an unhealthy attachment, is like opening a window for clarity to enter. The Spirit's whispers become audible when fear is no longer the gatekeeper of our choices. It is important to understand that fear is not a flaw, it is a signal. It tells us where our growth edges are, where we are clinging too tightly to comfort, and where we are resisting responsibility. When fear arises, it is an invitation to examine what is holding us back. Ask yourself, am I avoiding this because it is truly dangerous, or because it challenges me? Often the answer reveals that fear is not a warning, but a test of courage and integrity. The Spirit calls us to respond with honesty, discernment, and willingness, rather than avoidance. Reflection can help navigate this fear. When you feel hesitant, write down what the guidance is urging, what actions it asks of you, and what fears arise in response. Seeing the situation objectively allows insight to emerge. Over time, the practice of confronting fear with awareness builds a relationship with clarity itself. The Spirit is no longer distant, it becomes a companion in courage, a steady presence reminding us that growth requires action and that responsibility is not a burden but a privilege. Hearing clearly is not about eliminating fear, but about moving despite it, even when we clear the mind, confront our emotional blocks, distinguish desire from direction, and overcome fear. Many still struggle to hear the Spirit. The reason is often simpler than we imagine. We ignore silence and stillness. We live in a world that equates noise with progress, chatter with connection, and busyness with significance. In this environment, quiet is undervalued, stillness is uncomfortable, and reflection is neglected. Yet the Spirit does not speak through alarms, alerts, or constant activity. It speaks in the spaces between, in the pauses, in the gentle moments that often go unnoticed. Silence is not empty, it is pregnant with possibility. It is in the absence of noise that we can finally notice the subtle currents of guidance. Yet most of us flee from silence because it forces us to confront ourselves. When the external world is muted, the internal world becomes unavoidable. Thoughts, emotions, and long-suppressed truths rise to the surface. Many people fear this exposure. They fill every moment with distractions, scrolling endlessly, listening to music, talking incessantly, or rushing from task to task to avoid the quiet. In doing so, they inadvertently block the very CLA. Really, they seek. The Spirit whispers in silence, but if we never allow silence, we never hear the message. Stillness is equally important. There is a difference between merely being quiet and truly being present. Stillness is the conscious act of pausing, of observing without judgment, of allowing awareness to settle like sediment in a jar of water. When we move constantly, even in thought, we create turbulence that keeps insight from settling. True clarity requires a calm, attentive mind. This is why practices like meditation, prayer, or contemplative reflection are not rituals to be performed mechanically. They are invitations to create inner space where guidance can be recognized. Without stillness, even the clearest nudges may feel like random thought, coincidence, or wishful thinking. Many people underestimate the power of small, intentional pauses. Even 5 minutes of mindful breathing or quiet reflection can begin to untangle the web of distraction that clouds perception. Yet allow themselves this luxury, believing that time spent in silence is wasted. In reality, it is the most productive time one can invest in cultivating discernment. It is in these moments that the Spirit's voice can finally reach us, subtle and patient, unhurried by the demands of the outside world. Clarity rarely shouts, it waits quietly until we are ready to listen. Ignoring silence is also a way of avoiding responsibility for self-awareness. When the world is noisy, it is easy to blame confusion on external factors, stress, chaos, or other people's actions. Silence removes that excuse. When we allow stillness, we are confronted with our own thoughts, our own biases, and our own unresolved issues. The Spirit often communicates through reflection, asking us to notice patterns, acknowledge truths, or recognize areas where change is needed. If we avoid stillness, we avoid these invitations, and guidance is lost in the background noise of life. Another challenge is that silence and still. Stillness require trust. In silence, we are often faced with the unknown. We do not know what insights will emerge or what truths will be revealed. Many people rush past the quiet because they fear what it might uncover. They fear feeling pain, regret, or inadequacy. Yet the Spirit's guidance rarely comes without this self-confrontation. The messages we most need are often hidden behind discomfort, waiting for the courage to pause, to reflect, and to listen. Without this willingness, guidance is muted, no matter how present it may be. Modern life trains us to seek stimulation constantly, to crave distraction, and to fill every gap with sound or activity. The irony is that in doing so, we starve ourselves of clarity. The Spirit speaks in whispers, in fleeting impressions, in the soft tug of conscience or intuition. These messages are subtle precisely because they respect free will. They cannot force themselves upon a mind that refuses to be quiet. The more we ignore silence, the more we missed. Ache our own desires, fears, or compulsions for divine guidance. Only in stillness can we discern the difference. Practical ways to cultivate this skill are simple but require commitment. Begin with deliberate pauses in your daily life. Take a few minutes each morning to breathe, reflect, and observe your mind without judgment. Notice what surfaces. In the evening, allow yourself a similar pause to review the day. Observe decisions made and recognize patterns. Even during routine activities, cultivate awareness. Feel your surroundings, your emotions, and the subtle nudges of intuition. These small practices create the habit of stillness, training the mind to recognize the gentle voice of guidance amidst life's noise. Ultimately, ignoring silence and stillness is a choice, and it is one that comes at a cost. Every moment spent avoiding quiet is a moment spent blind to insight, disconnected from intuition, and insulated from the subtle wisdom that seeks to guide us. Conversely, when we embrace stillness, clarity is no longer fleeting. It becomes a constant companion, guiding thoughts, actions, and decisions with precision and grace. The ability to hear the Spirit is not a gift reserved for the extraordinary. It is available to anyone willing to pause, to reflect, and to embrace quiet. Hearing clearly begins with the courage to stop talking, stop doing, and simply listen. Even when the mind is clear, emotions are processed, desires are discerned, fear is faced, and silence is embraced, many still struggle to hear the Spirit. The reason is subtle but profound: the absence of inner discipline and self-honesty. Without discipline, clarity becomes fleeting. Without honesty, guidance is distorted. The Spirit speaks in truth and integrity, but if we have not committed to both in our own lives, its message is either ignored or misinterpreted. Inner discipline and self-honesty are not just virtues, they are the foundation upon which spiritual clarity rests. Inner discipline ends with consistency. The mind, left unchecked, wanders constantly. Habits, routines, and impulses dictate attention and action. A disciplined mind, however, has learned to notice patterns, regulate impulses, and create space for reflection. This is not about rigid control or perfection, but about cultivating the ability to pause and observe, even when distractions beckon. It is the daily commitment to align actions with intention, to follow through on moral and personal responsibilities, and to cultivate habits that support insight. Without this structure, the mind becomes a chaotic field where guidance cannot take root. Self-honesty is equally essential. It is one thing to sit in silence or attempt to reflect. It is another to confront truth without excuse or denial. Many people deceive themselves, even subtly, about their motivations, fears, or intentions. We convince ourselves that we are listening, while in reality we filter messages to fit our comfort, desires, or pride. The Spirit does not accommodate denial. It communicates only to the degree that we are willing to face reality fully. Without honesty, even the clearest whisper of guidance is ignored, rationalized, or misinterpreted to suit our existing narratives. A lack of discipline and self-honesty often manifests as procrastination. We delay reflection, delay action, and delay confrontation with ourselves. In these delays, clarity diminishes. The Spirit speaks in the present moment, but when we habitually postpone listening, we allow confusion, fear, and desire to dominate our perception. It is in the practice of consistent attention, daily reflection, mindful decision-making, and deliberate honesty that we create the conditions for guidance to be recognized and acted upon. Many people resist discipline because it feels restrictive. They equate freedom with spontaneity, believing that structured reflection or ethical accountability limits creativity or enjoyment. Yet true freedom arises from alignment, the integration of mind, heart, and action. Discipline does not confine, it liberates. It provides the stability needed to notice subtle cues, to act with integrity, and to maintain focus when external noise or internal temptation arises. Without it, clarity is sacrificed to impulsivity, habit, or distraction. Self-honesty also requires courage. It is uncomfortable to admit to oneself that certain behaviors, attitudes, or patterns are harmful or Many rationalize, justify, or hide from this truth. We tell ourselves that we are good enough, working on it, or just busy, when in fact, avoidance has created a blind spot. The Spirit's guidance is precise, but if we are unwilling to confront our own inconsistencies, we cannot recognize it. True listening requires admitting where we are mistaken, acknowledging what we avoid, and facing the aspects of ourselves we would rather ignore. The consequences of neglecting discipline and honesty are cumulative. A small daily avoidance, a tiny lie to oneself, or a fleeting moment of inattention may seem insignificant, but over time they form layers of distortion. The mind becomes a distorted lens, filtering guidance through the biases of convenience, fear, and ego. The Spirit's voice, subtle by nature, cannot penetrate this opacity. The only way to clear the lens is through disciplined practice and unflinching honesty. Each small act of integrity, Each moment of genuine reflection gradually removes the fog, allowing guidance to shine through with clarity. Discipline and honesty also cultivate the humility necessary for spiritual receptivity. When we are disciplined, we recognize our limitations and structure our lives to compensate for them. When we are honest, we acknowledge our faults and open ourselves to correction. Both qualities are essential for hearing guidance because the Spirit does not cater to pride, avoidance, or self-deception. It requires a readiness to see truth, accept responsibility, and align one's actions accordingly. Without humility grounded in discipline and honesty, guidance is either distorted or ignored entirely. The process begins with small, deliberate actions. Establish daily routines that include reflection, ethical self-checks, and moments of conscious stillness. Journal honestly about your motivations, fears, and decisions. Observe where you deviate from your values and where you are avoiding uncomfortable truths. Over time, these small acts build a foundation of clarity. The Spirit's whispers, once lost in the chaos of avoidance and self-deception, become recognizable and actionable. The more disciplined and honest we become with ourselves, the more perceptive we are to the guidance that has always been present. Ultimately, the ability to hear clearly is not granted by circumstance, luck, or external conditions. It is cultivated through the intentional practice of discipline and the courageous embrace of self-honesty. Without them, all other efforts, clearing the mind, processing emotions, discerning desires, facing fear, embracing stillness, remain incomplete. These two qualities act as the final filter, the necessary alignment that allows insight to move from subtle impression to actionable clarity. Hearing the Spirit clearly is a matter of cultivating both courage and integrity within oneself.